Chanted, Joyce. Thank you. These traditions of Sangha life, of community life, of Buddhist life are very lovely to see held in such a gracious and loving manner, and we tend in the West. I'm referring. My mind is thinking of all of my Western friends and reflecting on my own life as a Buddhist in this land as well. But it's not always evident when we begin practice as sort of Western Buddhists how valuable, or if in fact such things are of very much value to our practice. We spend so much. It's so difficult sometimes to get to practice and to find our way as Westerners into a Buddhist practice of some sort, and therefore just arranging our days in a way that permit a kind of meditation practice, and finding over time that we in fact value this practice a great deal is very often enough. It seems like that's quite an accomplishment, and it is. And these extra things, these things that we consider extra to practice, such as the formalities that we observed when we began, and the chant that Joyce just chanted. We don't give so much attention to these things because they just seem like extras. They're and even perhaps just cultural add-ons which really aren't essential. But probably you can feel as we were all listening to that request. Of course, the sincerity of the request as it was made there, but you can probably feel the mind settling. There's a kind of graciousness to the relationship. There's a respect. There's a respect which is formally uttered in the way of the chant, and in the response of a monk who is beginning to offer reflections. There's a respect which carries over into the subsequent talk and the way we listen to Dhamma. It isn't really necessary to listen to Dhamma and to try to remember every point that is made. I think Lumpur Cha would say that the best way to listen to Dhamma is just through the heart, just finding the resonance of the reflections that are being offered, and finding where the harmony lies. And very often there will be something in what a monk or nun offers which does somehow resonate. We're reminded, we hear echoes of it, we see echoes of it in our lives, and begin to reflect on it in a different way. But that the attitude of a student in school or in university to taking notes and to remembering every point that's made in a series of reflections, that's something we can set aside and rather consider this a different kind of occasion. Ajahn Chah apparently sometimes defined meditation as a holiday for the heart. Now, I'm not sure how many of you have ever thought of meditation as a holiday for the heart. And you can probably recognize that a person who would define it in these terms would have a very deep and abiding acquaintance with the beauty of meditation that we hopefully all touch from time to time. And it's very likely that Ajahn Chah basically made that abiding his home whenever he wanted to. So, but in a similar kind of way, perhaps listening to Dhamma in the right frame of mind or right frame of heart is a kind of holiday. It's just meant to be relaxing and letting things be absorbed at their own rate and in their own way. I'm actually starting. I'm going to start today's reflections with a little bit of reading. I got an email from Ajahn Achalo. Now Ajahn Achalo, okay, so Joyce and Jintana and Chinta in Australia. You can just remember that I'm speaking to these folks in Vancouver and wherever, Calgary and so forth now. So they don't know all of the people involved here, but so Ajahn Achalo was my abbot in Thailand, and we keep in pretty close touch actually. And so he sent me a nice email just a few days ago. He and some friends went on a little pilgrimage. He'd been very busy in his monastery and wanted some sort of inspiring break from this, and so he took the opportunity to have a bit of a pilgrimage within Thailand because it's so difficult to leave Thailand, of course. So they went to Chiang Mai and to Chiang Rai, which is in the very far north of Thailand, and to Sukhothai, which is an ancient capital, and then flew down to Bangkok, where they went to Thanajan Anan. Now, Thanajan Anan is Ajahn Achalo's main teacher, and Ajahn Achalo tries to see him several times a year. Very great monk, very fine teacher, and so he was going down at the very end of this pilgrimage, you might say, in order to pay respects to Ajahn Anan on his birthday. So that was the plan. So now this is a maybe I'll keep some of the names out of this, just so that if there are any people in the call who might be named, they won't feel at all embarrassed or anything. But okay, so here's a scenario. So I've just given you the kind of itinerary. So they're going to go to Sukhothai first, which is a few hours away from Ajahn Achalo's monastery, and they're going by van. And basically, he was driving to a place called Pitsanalok in the west, to the west of him, and then a group of people were going to meet him in Pitsanalok, and they were all coming up from Bangkok. So, and then they're going to go off on their travel. So Pitsanalok was a bit of a stop, and he has a lovely pair of students there who have a nice coffee shop. So that was a great place to stop. So that's where the scene takes us, okay? The first leg of our journey got off to a slightly wacky start, for we had planned to meet up at a friend's coffee shop in Pitsanalok and move on fairly quickly from there. But one of a student's other monk teachers, Longpo Bunma, had decided out of the blue to send her 1 ton of export quality, super large sized mangoes. He'd never done this before, and it all seemed rather strange. For her, she's a CEO and busy person living in a condominium, and she works at an office. What on earth would she possibly do with 1 ton of mangoes? The loaded pickup truck was already hurtling toward Bangkok when his attendant called, and a slightly panicked woman was told that he'd be that she would actually. She told him that. Sorry. Okay. The attendant called. She answers the phone, and she says, "Well, I'm not going to be in Bangkok. I'm going to be in Pitsanalok, which is 500 kilometers to the north." "No problem," said the attendant who's in the truck. "We'll meet you there instead." So evidently, the kind and compassionate old monk was worried on behalf of some of his long-term supporters. They'd not been able to export their harvest of mangoes to Korea as they'd done in previous years due to lack of flights. And he wanted this student of Ajahn Achalo's to buy 1 ton and share it with their friends. And so we waited, somewhat baffled, for the mangoes and wondered what to do with them. So they're all traveling, okay, and there's a ton of mangoes on its way. When the driver of this truck arrived at the coffee shop finally, this woman handed the handwritten letter from Longpo Bunma to our friend, the student of Ajahn Achalo's.
And while reading it, she suddenly got teary-eyed and then reread the letter to us. The price for mangoes had fallen from 90 baht to just 15 baht per kilogram. And even at 1/6 the price, the owners of the orchard were having difficulty selling them. Luangpur Bunma was so concerned, he was trying to find buyers himself. Now, I have to be honest, this is Ajahn Pavaro writing. I have to be honest and admit that when at first I was a little annoyed by this mango obstruction that has fallen on the would-be pilgrim's path. But hearing Luangpur Bunma's compassionate words read out and considering the terrible plight of the farmers, my own kind heart soon melted too, and I quickly got with the program. At 15,000 baht per ton, that's about 500 US, instead of 90,000 baht per ton, I felt that his monastery would be able to offer 1 ton of grade A mangoes to Ajahn Anan, that's his teacher, for his birthday from the monastery's general upkeep fund. Okay. That would be a mountain of auspicious merit. I decided that I'd check in with a committee member and then also with Lumpur. When I mentioned this out loud, the woman who had received the call initially, she wanted to buy 1 ton as well and offer them. And so did Kun Patama, another of the pilgrims from Bangkok, as well as Mei Chi Ying. This is yet another pilgrim. My goodness, but 4 tons of mangoes might be a bit much. Even so, the committee members were just fine about it, and so was Ajahn Anan. Great, he said. I'll have them distributed among my students when they come for the birthday gathering and send some back to each of the 10 branch monasteries as well. Thais just love food, abundance, and generosity, so no one even thought that having to store and distribute 10,000 plus mangoes would be too burdensome or even be a hassle. Everyone involved was just like, yay! Big, fat, sweet, juicy mangoes, bring it on. It was decided that the dear coffee shop owners would help deliver the mangoes to an old people's home, an orphanage, and a hospital nearby. Dao, the co-owner's father, had just passed away, and the funeral was literally that very same night. But she was happy to be making auspicious karma to dedicate to her father. That meant that we could finally push off and head towards a holy site. The sudden organizational and logistical challenges pertaining to buying and then distributing many tons of mangoes had been a bit frenetic. But once we set off and breathed out deeply, all felt joyful at heart with regards to having helped out the farmers and also having pledged a bountiful offering to Ajahn Anan. So I don't know if you could follow my little disjointed reading there, but you can see good spirits in abundance as well as mangoes. Not to forget mangoes. I seldom forget mangoes. I've had my share of lovely mangoes, and they're hard to forget now. So the theme of this talk then is merit, and first of all, I'll preface this by saying that this is, it sounds so extraordinary and uncommon, but in fact, with Buddhist practitioners in Thailand and probably Sri Lanka and certainly Malaysia as well, and in Asia, this is a pretty natural response to a kind of a situation like this, because from childhood, people born Buddhist in these Buddhist cultures have been raised to offer food in monks' bowls every morning, for instance. In Sri Lanka, they've got a bell in villages, and probably they still do this. And if some families experienced some great success in their life, maybe the daughter had just won an A in her chemistry exam or something, they'd go to the village bell and they'd ring it. And if you live in a village and you're out in the rice fields or you're doing the laundry or whatever you're doing, and you hear the bell ringing, you know that somebody that you know has just accomplished something, has just experienced some success. And so mudita, appreciative joy, can arise in your heart. And isn't that lovely?
So it's just a cultural tradition, but I think you can imagine how much fun it would be. But also, I think you can appreciate the kind of deep wisdom that underwrites this sort of tradition. Somebody thought of this. We need a bell. What's the bell for? Well, and so on and so forth. So Asians, I think largely because of the way generosity is understood, the way merit is understood in Buddhism, they have developed traditions of these kinds. And so, as I say, this kind of now this is exceptional in the sense that all of those people involved, they had the funds to be able to part with, with a lot of 15,000 baht is quite a bit in Thailand. So they had enough. They had enough resources to be able to do this. And obviously, if you didn't have those resources, you couldn't participate in quite this way. But if you're in that coffee shop and there's no way you had 15,000 baht to shell out for a bunch of mangoes, you would have participated by smiling from ear to ear and feeling mudita for the generosity, the kindness, the joy that was being generated in those whatever half an hour or something. That people, any member of a family knows quite well what it's like to give and receive a present, and what it's like to share with those in need, or even to feel happiness when we hear about some charity which has been enabled. A group of people to be uplifted in their lives in some way or another. So we all recognize, because human beings all have hearts, and hearts do resonate with goodness in this kind of way. I'm just saying this is somehow a kind of typical Asian story because of mangoes. Okay, let's just leave it at that. And it's because of mangoes. But it's a kind of thing. And actually, Lumpur Viradamo asked me to read this before the meal 2 or 3 days ago, just because it's so much fun and it's so Asian, and it's mangoes and so on. So mudita is something which is very lovely to dwell in, to reflect on, and to enjoy. I've thought. One of the lovely things about living with Lumpur Viradamo is that while he's been a monk for 47 years, and for all of that time, he's known Lumpur Samedo, and Lumpur Samedo has known him, and they're great friends, and so they actually are in touch quite a bit. I'm going to guess couple times a month they have a great old chat in the morning or something. Lumpur Samedo will phone up, and they have I'm not sure if they use Zoom or what, but they love each other's company, and they talk Dhamma, and they ask each other questions, and I think in a recent talk, Lumpur Viradamo then reported that they'd spoken about, he'd asked Lumpur Samedo what to him right concentration meant, and what faith was, what saddha meant. And Lumpur Samedo's response on saddha was interesting, because we typically understand saddha to mean faith. That's the typical translation. And then other people prefer confidence. Lumpur Samedo said trust. That was the way he holds saddha now, trust, which I liked a lot, because it feels quite grounded, doesn't it? Faith is still perhaps faith hasn't reached yet trust. It's faith, of course, is held in the mind, but there has to be some sort of resonance in the heart as well. But faith involves some sort of an idea that is very beautiful, perhaps. An idea that can be approached, can be worked towards. But the experience is still somewhat distant, perhaps. Trust, for me anyway, this is just the way I use this word, it feels more grounded. It feels somewhat more embodied. Trust is, there's less need with the notion of trust to be reverting resorting to an idea, but rather there is an experience more available, more known, more you're on more friendly terms with, more intimate acquaintance with the experience, perhaps. I'm just saying perhaps because we all know that translating Pali into English, and for that matter, simply speaking English and trying to communicate what we mean using words that we all know, that's difficult enough sometimes. So we do then need to be willing to be playful with language. And it's useful, for instance, as Buddhists, not to insist too much, too strenuously on a particular translation of Buddhist terminology, because sometimes that kind of view and opinion that can be set too rigidly, and it doesn't allow the Dhamma to breathe, you might say. There's not enough, maybe there's not as much heart as there could be in the Dhamma if we do that. So taking other words and sitting with them, just keeping them in your lap, kind of holding your hand and letting the word sit and settle for a while and see how it speaks to you. This can be useful. So this is just kind of Sangha life at Tisarana, listening to Lumpur Biradamo reflect on a lovely conversation he's just had with Lumpur Samedo. And then actually, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Lumpur Samedo, of course, is now at Amaravati. And he is, it seems, often giving the Dhamma reflections for the moon observance days, the full and new moons and the lunar quarters. So and we get the Zoom or whatever, we get the recording of that a few hours after it takes place, and of course we're still about 5 hours from England. So on those lunar observance days, we've for the last few months we've been playing Lumpur Samedo's fresh right off the Dhamma throne. So it's very sweet. It feels very connected to this tradition of ours. So thinking about again about merit and generosity and mudita. One of the valuable aspects of practice, I think, for me, is to spend time, to give time regularly to reflect on the goodness of my life, for instance, or the beauty of my friends, my friendships, or to reflect on things that I have done well, or even the beauty of the things to which I aspire. These are, in one way or another, these are avenues to merit in my life. And obviously I'm speaking to all of you because all of you have done good and have friendships that are to be treasured and have things of this kind. So I'm speaking personally, but I'm meaning this to be very much part of your experience to reflect on. And what these reflections do over time is, for one thing, because whenever we do things repeatedly, we become better at them. Sometimes to our detriment, we become better at things that aren't very useful. Yeah, so we call these bad habits. That's just the nature of karma. But so much of what Buddhist life is simply becoming acquainted with, becoming educated about, learning about the value of certain approaches, certain attitudes, certain perspectives in life, certain forms of action. And yes, organizing them into groups of teaching, maybe. We trot out the 4 thises and the 5 that's. Those little lists are very helpful just to kind of have at one's beck and call. We don't need too many of them. Just a few of them is good.
but we become engaged in our practice in maybe a deeper way to have some reference to these short lists. Short lists of what? Of Dhamma, therefore of beautiful ideas, which are themselves the avenue to liberation. So Dhamma, using Dhamma, thinking about Dhamma in this way is very useful. So I reflect on life in these kinds of ways. I remind myself of what I aspire to. I recall events in my life that were beneficial to myself and to others. And then I reflect on the beauty of these things. Or sometimes I go out in nature, because we live on a large property. I just go out. I was looking out, although it's dark outside, and I was looking in the direction that I walk. But I just walk out in the woods, stand and I look at some tree, and I think, I didn't create that tree. I couldn't create that tree. I wouldn't know how. And yet it lives there. It's maybe this or that tree is much older than I am. And I expect that actually there are forms of intelligence that it has that are quite beyond my ken, my understanding, my appreciation. Very subtle things that it knows about its environment that are I'm completely oblivious to. So it has a kind of wisdom in its sense. And I look at this tree and I think, how marvelous to live here and to be sharing the space with this tree here, or to watch this squirrel live out its life. And it has its own kind of intelligence, responding to temperature and nutrition, and it knows things about its environment so intimately. And again, in ways that I never do, I never have, and probably never will. And there is a kind of beauty to that, and something about the way Gaia is, the way this Mother Earth is, to be present to it and open to it is a very beneficial thing, and it's free. The monastery is paying dearly for the extra land that was purchased, and it has paid dearly for it. But you know what I mean. The beauty of a tree is free to enjoy. Just the feeling of the feet on the earth. These are free things, and in a way they are so the pleasures that they afford are so much deeper than the pleasures we often pursue in life. The pleasures that we take in our sensory experience, the pleasure of a good piece of carrot cake, or hot coffee, or the pleasure of being complimented in just the right way by somebody whose opinion we value, or all kinds of pleasures that we enjoy, but when sometimes we seek out, we try to manufacture sometimes, and we try to bring these pleasures into our life because the deeper, the quiet pleasures of just that tree and that squirrel, we forget about them. Maybe because our lives are lived so intimately in the midst of asphalt and concrete and steel girders, or maybe because we forget, we don't remember often enough what it is to be and just put your hand on a big boulder, or enjoy some natural scene, and listen to the rustle of the wind. These are simple pleasures. They're free, and they're more than simple. They're also deep, and they bring silence to the heart. And therefore, they make us more attentive. They allow us to be more attentive to the knowing which resides at the heart of awareness. as practitioners, maybe we don't speak as much as we might about the importance of nature in the world. And yet, you think of forest monks, for instance, Ajahn Chah, and he would always say the Buddha was born under a tree. He was enlightened under a tree. He gave his first teaching under a tree, and died of sal trees. And his life of practice and teaching. We forget about this because nature is not so intimately part of our lives. But for forest monks, those who have spent a part or a good part, perhaps, of their practice lives, living in jungles and forests of one kind or another, what they imbibe it through their daily lives. But not so surprising, there aren't so many forest monks these days. We had an old forest monk visit Anandagiri before I left. When was that? In October, I guess, last year. Was it? No, I was here last. So sorry, a year ago, last October or November. Lumpur J, and he's in his early 90s or late 80s. Joyce might remember, or Jintan might remember. Anyway, very, very spry, very, very alert, and he is regarded to have some attainment, certainly. And but he spent 30 years as a forest monk, and he lives at the Golden Triangle, far north of Thailand, and yet he'd been through our area in Khao Ko in Phetchabun province as a forest monk. He could actually remember he could remember our area. It's just a little part of Thailand, but he'd been all over the place. So, and I remember he's walking around Anandagiri, and he'd walk by a tree, and he'd touch the leaf, and then he'd remember that particular leaf is maybe good to heal a burn, or good to chew to get rid of toothache or something. He knew the trees and the plants that he was passing because they were useful. They were important for a forest monk of his pedigree to know. So yeah, those days are to some degree past, although in our tradition, young monks often do try to spend time out in the forest or going on long travels, tudong they call them. Quite often the tudongs's are spent to some degree walking along busy roads, but you cut into quiet areas when you can too. So we have that in monastic life, and but of course, probably of the Canadians that I remember seeing on this call so far, probably all of you have been avid campers at one time or another, and so you know very well what I'm speaking of. And I know many of you live right in the proximity of great mountain ranges too, the coastal range or the Rockies, and yeah, there's something very special about being in the Kananaskis or in the, in the coastal range overlooking the ocean, maybe, and just the stillness, the power of great mountains and the great forests that some of them are still relatively untouched in these areas. It's a great privilege to be able to partake in these situations. So I started off by talking about merit, didn't I? I've sort of moved here and there in my talk. I'm just looking at the time. Okay, is it actually? So it's 7:15 there. Is that right? Okay.
Yes, that's true.
Which means that we're supposed to. Have I been talking so very long that that we're now only 15 minutes until the end of our session?
That's
possibly,
what we plan, but it's up to you. What do you do?
Okay. Well, anyway, I have my hot drink here, and I'm good for a while yet. We do want to have a bit of time for Q&A, if you like.
Yeah, so let me see if I can think of a way to bring closure to this. So the story I told about this beautiful donation that was made to orphanage and various places, and to Ajahn Monastery, to be distributed to hundreds of guests, and to his branch monasteries, and just enjoyed by people. This is just a little an episode, really, in the life of dana, in the life of generosity, in a Buddhist culture, by people. And you don't have to be Buddhist to understand the meaning of this, because we, after all, we're all the products of generosity, aren't we? We're born as utterly helpless little infants, little babies. Um, we require the generosity of our mother's milk, and the care of our parents and siblings, and in so many ways we can't do anything without it. We require this human spirit of loving attention and generosity, just in order to be where we are now, listening to this set of reflections. So we all know this. All human beings know this. Doesn't matter whether you're Syrian or Nepali or Ugandan or wherever we are. We recognize the value in these things, and in doing so, we can reflect on them, and these reflections can bring us joy, because we recognize things that we have done, and we can participate in the merit that others have produced simply by reflecting on it, and by having mudita, by having appreciative joy for their goodness, and thinking about the what this goodness brings to the world. I mean, mudita actually, as Buddhists, we speak a great deal about metta and karuna, and compassion, but it's quite possible, and quite a beautiful thing too, to contemplate a meditation on a set of reflections on mudita. Because all around the world now, people are thinking of things and doing things that bring benefit to the other people's lives. They're going out of their way to do this. They're being generous for the first time in a long time, and finding the beauty in it, or they're doing it out of long habit, and they're so good at it. And the people that they're bringing things to, or offering their time to, or just giving attention to, are enjoying their presence and their offerings in various ways. These things are happening around the world at any one time, all the time. They don't make the news. They don't. There's no room right now, I don't think, in the news and in all of this COVID drama to find any good news stories in this, but they do happen. They do happen, and it's important to rejoice in them, to cultivate them, and to savor them, to create a special place in the heart of our reflections for mudita, for the value of merit, for the value of making merit, and for the value of enjoying the merit we've made, or that we've seen, we've observed, and to do this regularly. The Buddha told his son Ananda when he was a monk, before you do something good, bring it to mind and enjoy it. And while you're doing it, enjoy the experience of doing it. And after you've done it, reflect on that goodness and enjoy it. Bring it to mind and enjoy it. So this is a form of practice. We may not think of it. It doesn't seem like hard enough work to be practiced, does it? Keeping the spine stiff, and sitting on the floor, and all this difficult meditation practice. This is way too easy to be real practice, isn't it? No, because we're educating the heart. We're cultivating a kind of aesthetic, an aesthetic for beauty, and this is one of the ways we can do it. It becomes a resource, and it becomes a resource we can trust. So we can generate saddha. We can think of trust in terms of loving kindness and compassion, and in terms of mudita, appreciative joy. we can have a trust in the fact that this is actually good. It's good karma. It makes merit in and of itself. It just there's this beautiful cycle of merit, of spiritual power, which is generated by these kinds of reflections, these kinds of actions, these kinds of memories, these kinds of observations, appreciations, what have you. So there's so many ways to think about Dhamma, to reflect on Dhamma, and hopefully this offers some different approaches. Sometimes maybe it's given you some ideas, but so there. I'll leave my reflections with that. With my best wishes.
Thank you so much, Ajahn. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.